Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to come. We're super excited to have all of you here today for our product management workshop with Jenny. If this is your first ever event with Textbook Ventures, welcome. Hello, my name is Audrey, and I am currently the general manager for the team this year. Our team is constantly working hard to empower the next wave of student entrepreneurs by organizing events like these, creating content, and inviting awesome guests like Jenny to share stories and impart words of wisdom in the tech industry. Before we begin, just some digital housekeeping rules. Please make sure to mute yourself, but feel free to leave your videos on so we can engage with each other. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the comments as we go along. It is a workshop, so if you have any questions along the way, just drop it into the comments and we can stop here and there if there is anything you want to explore further. Anyways, tonight we have the lovely Jenny here to take you through some product management fundamentals. If you're here, it means that you've probably heard of the role before, but haven't been able to grasp exactly what a PM does day to day. So it's a role in tech which has gotten especially popular in the last few years with companies like Atlassian spearheading the growth of the position. So as well as being a former general manager at Textbook Ventures, Jenny worked at Atlassian as a PM for a few years before joining Eucalyptus VC as a product lead. Her roles at each company have been unique and really fascinating, so I will hand over to you, Jenny, to introduce yourself a little bit and take us through some core principles of product management.
Thank you so much, Audrey. You did such a good job introing me. But yeah, lovely to meet everyone. Thanks for joining me. It's super great to be here on the other side. As Audrey said, I used to be a general manager, I guess one of the first people that started Textbook Ventures actually. And so I know how stressful it can be organizing these events. I know I was very stressed back in the day, and it's super cool to be on the other side now, I guess, doing a talk myself. So yeah, I guess without further ado, I might jump in. Audrey, how do you want to do the questions that might pop up? Do you want to ask, just interrupt me and ask? Because I'm trying to figure out which screen to look at.
Yeah, so you just roll with your slideshow, your preso, and I will filter through the chat messages if people ask questions and just interrupt you if
Awesome.
It's reasonable.
That's good. I was oh man, it's gonna be 40 minutes of me talking to a screen, so it'd be awesome if everyone can engage a little bit. I'm a lot more used to talking to a crowd, so definitely my first time doing a webinar. Cool. So I'm gonna go straight into it. Today's talk is gonna be around just intro to product management, what it is, specifically more so around what it is as a career. So it does assume that it's pretty basic knowledge about product management, but hopefully a lot of you can learn something new today. So yeah, I'm the product lead at Eucalyptus. For those who have never heard of Eucalyptus, it is a company that is building the next generation of digital healthcare brands. So you might not have heard of Eucalyptus, but hopefully I know our marketing team does a pretty good job. You've heard of these brands, if you've gone on Facebook or Instagram, I think we've targeted you if you're a guy or a female. So yeah, the very first brand we launched actually almost over a year ago is Pilot, which is essentially an online telehealth platform for men's health. So allowing men to get access to GPs a lot easier and talk about more, I guess, stigmatized problems. And then on Kin, it is a fertility health platform, so giving women access to fertility information and services. Currently, our first product there is shipping contraception on a subscription basis, so I think that's helped a lot of women who have to buy the contraceptive pill all the time. And then very exciting, we have a third brand for all those who love skincare. I know during COVID, that's when I started my skincare addiction, because what else is there to do during COVID? And this is essentially a brand called Software. Yes, it is called Software, where you can get online custom prescription skincare. So sort of like Curology for those who, again, watch a lot of YouTube skincare videos like I do. And it's coming very soon. So register. There's a wait list there if anyone is keen to check it out. Just have to do my my plug. As Audrey mentioned, I used to work at Atlassian, so I entered through the internship and then later the grad program. I'll walk a bit more around like that process a little bit later on. I also did a bit of stuff around Untitled Ventures because I love startups so much, and I just thought everyone should at least one thing in their life, in their like uni life, like try work at a startup or like start a startup, because I just thought it was such a great experience. And for most product managers, we don't usually, right off the bat start off as a product manager. Before then, I did quite a lot of product design work while at uni at various startups just to get some tech knowledge. So agenda for today, the first question we're going to answer is, what is product management? The second one is, what do we actually do on a day-to-day and demystify that? The very third one is, skills you might need as a PM. And the fourth one is trying to give some tips and tricks on how you might get into product management and like pathways to that. Cool. So the very first question is, what is product management? I think if it was a really easy question to answer, I wouldn't have to spend so much time every presentation I do around product management to actually answer this question. I remember when I first started product management, like I had to Google what my job was, like as I was a product manager. So that gives you a bit of insight on like how confusing this role is, but also like how recent it is and how it's always evolving. So hopefully I can give you a better answer than Google. I'll try. So I think to answer this question, I want to level set on, what is a product? And essentially to me, a product is a solution to a problem that is shared by many people. And so it could come in many different forms. So, if you have physical products like AirPods, I guess the problem they're trying to solve there is creating a reliable like wireless headphone that is connected to your Apple ecosystem. I'm not really sure. I'm not an AirPod person. But there's a koala mattress where they're trying to solve the problem around convenience and getting like mattresses conveniently delivered to you. Digital products, we're surrounded by that like every single day. Stuff that we're most familiar with, Spotify, Netflix, Duolingo, and so much more. Other products are also like services, right? Like travel agent is a product that you sell. Like it's a solution to a problem. If you want someone else to organize your travel for you. Same thing with wedding planners. And then experiences are also like a form of product, like an escape room, yoga retreat. And I think nowadays, products are usually like a combination of all of the above, right? And again, that's kind of why the product management role is always evolving, because, even at Eucalyptus, at Atlassian, I used to be like purely digital on, SaaS software, collaboration tools. At Eucalyptus, I start touching stuff that's a bit more in the physical world because, we deliver physical goods, even though the digital part of going to do the consult is also such a core part of the product. But today, I'm just going to talk about this, which is the digital side of things, which is where typically the product management role exists and is like most prominent. But you might sometimes find product managers like in the physical space, maybe not so much in service and experience side of things, but yeah. So I'm going to deep dive just a little bit on Spotify to explain, I guess, like what goes through, developing product. So Spotify's mission is to unlock the potential of human creativity by giving 1 million creative artists the opportunity to live off their art and billions of fans the opportunity to be inspired by it. And so this is their company mission. And I think as all product people, or usually any employee of a particular company, you're doing something to further this mission just a little bit more. And so when you try to think about, okay, how do we get closer to this? Like, what are the problems that people face today, specifically around music in this scenario? One of them that comes to mind is, like, for example, how do we actually get fans to discover new artists that they love? And one of my favorite features on Spotify, it's also one of like it's not like a particularly new feature as well, but it's one of the core reasons that I got really hooked on Spotify is the Discover weekly playlist. For those who don't know, because it's not the most ironically discoverable feature, it is essentially a 30-song playlist that they refresh every single week, and they recommend new artists and new music to you, usually based on like what other people like you have also listened to, and this gives a really great way for you to discover new music, discover new artists, and just like freshen up your like playlist a little bit. And when you start building a feature like this, there's obviously a team. I know that's very and this is a very oversimplified view of like what goes into even building this feature. In order to make this happen, obviously you need an engineer. Like the engineer actually builds it, makes it all functional. They might work with like a data scientist on how to best create the best algorithm to recommend songs based on different preferences. Usually there's a group of engineers, not just one. And then there's usually like a designer where they would figure out how this look and feels, how it would interact, how to design something that is very intuitive for the user so they can easily understand like what that love heart means or what that download toggle means. And then there's a product manager. And the product manager is the person that decides in the very, very first place that it's even a good problem to solve, and identifies exactly what the customer, like what this feature is meant to achieve. And so if I were to summarize all of that, in my opinion, product managers usually define what problem we are solving. So, you know, for that, like the discovery problem, who we are actually solving it for, and why it is important to solve it. And obviously they work with the designers and developers to build a solution that meets those customer needs. And so it's a little bit of an intersection between, you know, user experience design, knowing a bit of tech, but not too much, and understanding how to meet business goals. And so if I apply that, you know, the what here is like, you know, it's hard to discover new music. The who is probably like music enthusiasts, because you can imagine that if you're like a hot hits kind of person, you probably don't need this sort of thing. And then the why is, well, you know, Spotify's mission is to connect more artists, connect more fans to artists. So that's a core reason on why you should do it. If it's like a feature that doesn't even help the core mission, so let's say, I don't know, release like, damn, I can't think of one, but I guess like, you know, in the why is probably the most important, because you could easily build features that might not even help with the overall company goal. So that's all nice and dandy, but of course, like the real world is a bit more complex than that. You know, you have constraints depending on your company, your problem that you're trying to solve. There might be resource constraints. Maybe you only have 2 devs. There might be deadlines because you want to showcase something at like a customer showcase. There are competitors. Maybe competitors are you know, overtaking the market much quickly than you expected. There are legal requirements. There's like customer requests. And a lot more means that usually it's the product manager that needs to figure out, okay, like how to best solve this problem. So maybe there's different features that can solve that problem better, or in a way that it's like delivers on the right time, and also not using not too much effort. So other definitions of the product management includes, you know, Ben Horowitz, who is a famous investor in Silicon Valley. He said that product managers are like the mini CEOs of the product. And he's not entirely wrong. There are, I guess, like to give you a bit of understanding of like what life could be after becoming a product manager. These very, very impressive people, for those who don't know, they're all like CEO of Google, CEO of Microsoft, ex-CEO of Yahoo, really prominent people in the tech world. All of these people used to be product managers, and so the skill set kind of aligns. I'm not saying I would ever become like one of them, but I guess like this is what the best of the best becomes. So very similar to CEOs, I guess like CEOs look at like a very large and broad scope, right? They think about the company. A product manager kind of does that, but on a much more like smaller scale, on like a product scale. And there are generally 4 key things that they're responsible for, which is, the product vision. So what is the dream end state of the product? And also rallying the team behind it. So actually relay what this vision is to the team so they can get really hyped about it. I think one of the key things is, product is more than just what you build, but it's also like how your team feels about it, and making sure you build an environment that they're super excited about the vision, because they can also bring their own ideas and know about the problem, and hence contribute a lot more. Once you have that, then the next thing is, strategy. So how do you actually get to that end state? So how do you differentiate from your customers? Is it through, I guess in Spotify's case, data, right? That's one of the key differentiation, like using data to really create great personalized music, and knowing which music people actually engage with, and hence, people really love Spotify, always use it. How you prioritize those features. So like, what should you actually be focusing on first, in order for you to meet that dream end state. The third thing is design. So not so much like what a designer does, which is like, figuring out the user interaction, but making sure that at a high level, the solution that you have is functional, useful, and delightful, and actually meets the customer needs. There is no point if you identify the problem, but the solution doesn't actually fit it, and it doesn't actually solve the problem. So that's also a really important part. And then the last part is actually going and executing that strategy. And so that is working with the engineers and the designer to build it, make any decisions that come up, measure the success, and continuously learn from, because sometimes like you might build something, it might not work, and continuously trying to drive to that product vision. So while I'm here, I'm going to debunk some myths about product managers as well. The very first myth I always hear, I remember when I used to tell people that I'm a product manager, they're like, oh, that's so cool, you're already like managing people. I want to stress that you definitely don't manage people. You have no authority over others. You don't manage the engineers or the designers. You just manage the product. And so, unless you are like a product manager, which is like a manager of product managers, that's one of the key myths, where you usually don't have anyone reporting to you. Product managers equals project managers. Project management, which is, around figuring out how to best execute tasks, making things that are on track, communicating to stakeholders, maybe part of the job, but the difference is, I guess, product managers usually spend most of their time on like strategy, research, and solution design, whereas project managers focus on really meeting the deadlines and getting the project to the finish line. And the very third one, which I already alluded to, which is product managers are the boss. Unlike CEOs, we are not actually the boss. So I guess that's one of the key difference. One of the key parts of the job is actually to convince the team and stakeholders. So I guess like if you come up with a product vision and a strategy, that's not it, right? Like you have to actually convince the team and stakeholders that it is the right decision to go, because at the end of the day, it's not really your company. So what do we do every single day? Like everything with product management, it really depends. It's super different from the problem you're trying to solve, the team that you are with, and the company. Like I've jumped like several teams, even within Atlassian, and even in that, in the same company, my job felt different. And so I'll give you a few examples on what that sort of looks like. So my very first team at Atlassian, to give you a bit of context, I was working on, I guess, large infrastructure, very technical problems around scale and performance. So literally things you can't see, right? Like literally like putting up new cloud regions, which essentially looks like, actual like data centers and stuff like that. And so in that role, like I didn't really do too many customer interviews. I worked mostly with engineers and architects on figuring out like cost projections. I did lots of business cases for the CTO. I did lots of stakeholder management meetings because it was a massive like multi-team, literally like 10, 15 teams and like 6 months to launch, working with them to just make sure we're on track, and then doing like working with like marketing to do like some sort of press release. So in that role, I was a lot more across like the financials. I had a much bigger role, like strategically deciding where to launch things. But then in like my second role, I guess I was craving something a bit more customer facing because I was like a designer, right? And so the next role I joined was a team that was quite newly formed. So it was like, it was like essentially some new feature team that we wanted to figure out. It was on the innovation side of things. And so I spent lots of time doing lots of customer research, a lot of strategic thinking. So that like goes through like competitor research, going through like all of our feedback at Atlassian, understanding what customers actually care about, doing a lot of like workshopping and design sprints. So coming up with ideas and designs and then, iterating on them. And so that's completely different from what I was doing in my previous team. And then at Eucalyptus, and for context, Atlassian is about like, 5,000 people now or something like that. So it's a very, very big tech company. And then at Eucalyptus, I am the first PM writing solo. We are about 30 plus people now. And I have a much broader role. So I do lots of strategy. I also partake in interviews and building teams. I might talk to partners like around like integrations with tech. We don't have a designer, so I also do the designs myself. So it's a wide variety of things. So I think something that is also really interesting, and one of my favorite parts of becoming a PM, is just like the amount of people you get to work with. So even between organizations, you work with so many different types of people. So at Atlassian, the people I worked really, really closely with was essentially the designer and the engineer. We called it the triad because you need someone from design, someone technical, and someone, I guess, a bit more business oriented. And so that was the triad. And oftentimes we had an architect, which is like someone with a technical background that designs like systems across the product. And less often having an analyst. So you might not have to do a lot of the analysis yourself, maybe some really high level ones, but you could have an analyst that could do like really deep number crunching for you. And I might lightly touch support, might lightly touch like copy/content, and lightly touch marketing and legal. But I guess at Atlassian, a lot of that stuff is specialized and you get to outsource a lot of your work. Contrast this to Eucalyptus, where the PM essentially, this is actually a lie, I don't have this one. So, but my role at Eucalyptus, I work very closely with marketing because we are much more marketing focused organization. I work very closely with finance, so I understand the numbers a lot more, whereas like at Atlassian, I literally had no idea except, our P&L sheets. I work a lot closely with doctors. I partake in partnerships. I also I work with supply chain closely to figure out what technical integrations they might need there. So as you can see, like every organization, you'll be working with so many different types of people. That's also like one of the best/worst parts of becoming a PM, depending on what type of person you are, is that you have to talk to a lot of people.
Very good. Wait,
Yep.
before we continue, I'm just going to interrupt you a little bit for some of the questions that we have. I think in the last 2 slides, you've talked a lot about like the breadth of the PM role and how it changes between different organizations. And Vinti asks, like, So as a business student, can you be a product manager? So a business student without a tech background, is it still possible to be a product manager?
Yeah, I mean, like I don't really identify myself as having a technical background, and I can probably I'll go into a bit more details about like typical pathways. But no, like a lot of my friends in product management might have like a fashion design degree. They might have like a business degree. It is really one of those professions that have no like prerequisites really.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I think that kind of also answers Angelo's question there, where you kind of asked if a software engineer student can become a product manager. We'll probably dive into this question a little bit more later in the session as well. We also have a question from Nishan asking what the difference is between like a product manager versus a customer experience designer. Are they different or the same roles, or does it depend on what company you're in?
I would say like, so I used to be a product / UX designer. I would say it really depends on, yeah, absolutely depends on the company. So if you're a really small company of like 10 people, what you might find is that the product designer, and this used to be me, right? Designs a lot of the product. They decide what features, they do a lot of the customer discovery and all of that sort of stuff. They work with the engineers. And so if you take a look at that, it's pretty much the same role, in my opinion, just that you are more leaning towards design. But then when you have a team that has a product manager and a UX designer, that's when the responsibilities start to split. The designer does less of the prioritization. So I think usually the designer does help out with figuring out what the problem is. They'll be part of the like the interviews and all of that sort of process. But once you have the two of them, you kind of split that role. So the PM starts looking about the strategy, the prioritization, each of the features, and then the designer starts to look at, I guess, like the solution that would solve that problem. So usually designers are a bit more solution focused, whereas the product manager is a bit more problem focused.
Cool, that's all for now.
Awesome. Okay, so I am going to deep dive just a little bit because I feel like that I just, like Audrey said, I just made a point about how broad the role is. But I think every product manager, one of the key parts of becoming a product manager is shipping features, right? And so I want to just like give you an example of like what I sort of do when I'm developing features. And so there's usually like let's assume you have the product vision and the strategy all packed and you've done the roadmap. And let's say you like identify a problem or a feature you want to build. So the very first step then is to do that research on that problem. And I'll go into a bit more detail on like what I usually do. And then you start planning it. Like once you decided that you want to build something, you define like what the experience you actually want to ship first to your customer. And then you start preparing for the sprint. And so a sprint is essentially just the way that engineers work. That's how they split. It's like a cadence, how they split their, I guess, like work. So every sprint has a goal, features you want to ship. And so that's what I mean by sprint for those who haven't heard of it. And then the third step is, working with engineers to actually build the solution. And you have a role there around like testing and managing releases and communications. And once you've actually released it, okay, what can you actually learn from that feature? So, have you reached said goals? Any insights, any learnings? And so I'm going to go a bit deeper into each of these. And so the very first thing is whenever, let's say like you get presented a problem, which is, you notice that, I guess in my example at Eucalyptus, we needed to rebuild the platform that our doctors use to manage their consultation. So how do they actually prescribe medication for a couple of reasons. But in order for me to actually start doing that, I had to figure out, okay, what problems, like how do we improve the product? What problems do the doctors actually currently have? And so I did heaps of customer interviews, and that is just literally jumping on a Zoom call, like, you know, given the day and age, with a lot of them, and start categorizing the insights and seeing patterns that occur. And that helps you prioritize what problems they sort of have and that are most common amongst everyone. And I might then take a look at competitor research, like what features do some of these products also have. I would also chat to subject matter experts. So I guess like I would chat to doctors are the subject matter experts in this scenario, but maybe the stakeholders. You might take a look at market research, which is a little bit different from competitor research, because market research is more around like where the market is expected to go, a bit more trends analysis. You might do a bit more like surveys, focus groups, other ways of understanding a problem. You might do a bit of like validation testing as well. So, and then you start planning for development. Let's say I say, yes, we're going to build a new platform for the doctor, like a new consultation product or something. Then I would figure out, okay, when should we actually build it? And that is usually driven by, you know, company goals. You know, are we going to hit certain goals if I schedule it now, or is it a key goal? So should we schedule it earlier? I would prioritize features, because obviously I might be wanting to build a doctor platform, but another thing I might be wanting to build, I don't know, a new add to cart feature, or like a new quiz or something, right? And so how do you make decisions on prioritizing which one you do first? And then I guess for me, I would start wireframing the solution. So high level designs of what features we want, how they work, and the end artifact there is writing what I call a feature spec. And so this is an example of what I have on the right hand side, which is where I would go, you know, flow by flow, identify exactly what we need for each step, and then the developers can essentially start estimating and figuring out how to build it. Once they start building it, it's relatively hands-off. You're sort of just there to answer their questions. You're there, at least I'm there, to, you know, test and make sure all the requirements have been met. One thing you sort of learn when you're doing product development, product feature development, is that you write something and you realize, and then they start building something and you realize what you wrote was not super clear to them, and that's like, you know, just classic communication, right? So while it's pretty hands off in terms of like you doing work, we always communicate all the time, and that takes you know, that takes a chunk of your time. Once you have tested and you release it, there is a process around release management, right? So that's making sure the right people know that it's been released. Maybe you need tutorials, maybe it's a bit different, and so you need tutorials to show people. Maybe you need to tell support about the changes. Usually you can't just release and expect everything to go well, and oftentimes I'm on like customer support to prioritize any incoming bugs reported. So that's usually for doctors. And then once you've released and it's all good to go, I think one really critical thing is, you know, having a feedback loop, and actually assessing how you did. And then for the next feature you do a little bit better. So that includes like analyzing data to review whether your feature was successful or not, categorizing any feedback that comes through. And I think one key thing that not everyone really does is how do you communicate these learnings to your development team? Because I think it's one thing where you're an engineer and you're working on something so hard, and you don't know how it performs, or whether it's, you know, the customers like it, whether all those sort of things. I think as a PM, it's super important for you to actually relay that information. And so we usually do something called like demos every like 2 weeks. And that's where I would usually tell the rest of the org like how things are going. Okay, so moving on to like, I guess, skills. Now that you know a bit more about, I guess, the day-to-day. Most of it is soft skills. So I think this answers like the earlier question on like, you know, whether a software engineer or a business student can be a PM. There are really no hard skills, in my opinion, that you really need. Most of it is around, I guess these are the four like things that I think are key to product management, which is one, communication, which is around like storytelling. How well do you get your point across? Presenting. So obviously I do these sort of things as a way to practice. Written and verbal communication. You're trying to translate a lot of information and then put it into a doc. For developers, you're also trying to communicate to stakeholders. So communication is super key. How do you target the way you talk depending on different audiences? How do you talk to a technical audience versus how do you talk to a very non-technical audience? And then obviously listening. So actually listening and understanding what people actually want. And then the other thing, which is probably one of the hardest things to even measure, is leadership. So how well do you think you're inspiring the team? Like how well do you think they know and get excited by the vision? Taking initiative and driving things. How do you get others to actually listen to you? Also, other than that, also like facilitation. So how do you like empower the rest of the team? The third thing is customer focus. So how do you gain a really good understanding of the customer? So that's around, I guess this becomes a bit more hard skill where, how do you conduct a really good user interview? Because there is an art and science to that. How do you do focus groups? How do you conduct good research? How do you do good data analysis? So you might need a bit of like Excel or like SQL, but those are not hard things to learn if you put your mind to it. And then the fourth thing is like, how do you drive outcomes, which is around, decision making. So not just making decisions, but also making them at a fast enough pace. Stakeholder management, collaborating with teams, prioritizing things, and making sure there's a build, measure, learn loop. So that kind of sounds like you're going to be good at everything. I think it's impossible to be good at everything. And so there's this PM craft triangle that we used to use at Atlassian that helps you understand like what your specialty as a product manager. So it's pretty interesting because product manager is a very broad role, but in reality, you can actually specialize in certain areas. And so, there's a triangle. On one spectrum, you can be a general manager, and that's someone that's usually a bit more revenue goals focused, usually very effective communicators, obsessed with like revenue numbers, how you're going as a business, like really strong business acumen. And then there is a scientist, which is someone that's like innately curious, a bit more hypothesis driven, pretty systematic, like follows process through and through, quite analytical. And then there's the artist who applies like product intuition. They're storytellers. They have a really strong design skill set. They care about like how the user feels. And so you could be here on the PM craft triangle and be a very effective PM still. People that usually are here are really great at becoming, at like enterprise level type companies, becoming like a high level product manager or like a manager of managers. People here are usually really great in like growth / experiment driven teams. So if you're someone that focuses on increasing retention or increasing conversion numbers, so landing pages and stuff like that. And people here are usually people that are really great at like innovating, and usually like startups where you don't have much data and you have to kind of rely on your gut feel a bit more. And obviously you can be a bit more well-rounded and place yourself here. Okay, so pathways into PM. So how do you actually get into product management? I guess I'll start off very quickly with my story and how I got into product management. So for me, I mean, like even before this, when I first graduated from high school, I actually I applied to be, I guess, like a science degree, sorry. And then I realized I was like failing in the science degree. And then I also realized I didn't really like it because I was trying to become an optometrist. And essentially I ended up working like getting a degree or like changing my degree to commerce and design. So at like UNSW, because design was one of those passions that I always loved. And I was like, if I can't become an optometrist, which I didn't really want to do anyway, because my parents forced me to, maybe I can do design, which is at least, might not be rich, but like that's my misconceptions earlier. You can actually do very well as a designer. I may as well do something that I love. And that's actually when I started working into startups, because I was like, for some reason, I had this misconception that like designers don't make money and I'm going to starve. And so I was like, oh, I really need to get internships and like work experience, because, that's how I can be successful. And so that's how I actually landed my first startup role without even knowing that it was a startup role. It was like an internship, and they posted on like UNSW free food. And obviously they offered free food. So that's why I joined. And so at that company, I worked in so many different things, like from operations to business development to design. So I had a pretty all-rounded skill set. It helped me learn more about what I was interested in. Fun fact, I never actually wanted to be a PM, which is interesting because now everyone wants to be a PM. But I actually was trying to become like a UX designer. And so given I didn't have much experience, I applied where I could, but obviously got no responses. But I also cold emailed a lot of different companies. I think a lot of people don't do this enough. I swear, like I emailed like 40 or 50 different companies that I really liked. And I ended up getting one email who eventually didn't actually give me a UX design role, and didn't have any roles, but they referred to me to another company where I did get a role as a product manager. So that's how life kind of takes you. And that's how I landed my very first product management role, and how I even got introed to it in the first place. And then from that, I really loved what I was doing. And so I ended up applying for the PM internship at Atlassian. And given that I already had quite a lot of startup experience, and I think when you apply for an internship, especially PM internship or grad program at Atlassian for product management, what they're usually looking for is, usually an all-rounder skill set, understanding like how tech works, like working in a tech-ish company. And yeah, I loved it there at Atlassian and worked there for a couple of years. And now I'm on my product management journey. So I think from there is no right or wrong way to become a product manager. I will say that, unfortunately, there's very little like junior PM roles, and there's very little grad roles in Australia. But hopefully you can find ways to still get a job. And I'll tell you a few stories about like how some of my PM friends got a role. So one of my friends, he started doing industrial design at UTS. So, designing furniture and stuff like that. While at uni, he got an internship at a startup. He mostly worked in operations and like figuring out how to develop like personalized sports gear. He ended up doing UX design, and then randomly got a job at product management. Like product management is one of those jobs that like you randomly get. This person did try to my second friend did try to get a role in PM. She had a fashion design degree. She was originally self-employed, became project manager at like a education company, eventually moved on to like customer success role. And then she learned about product management, and she essentially went to a lot of events, talked to a lot of product managers, and got a role through that. And that's just by like seeing what's available, asking people, because some roles are just never advertised, right? And then the third one, which is more of technical background, I suppose. Like one of my friends had an electrical engineering degree. He started off as a software engineer, did IT became an IT consultant, eventually did program management, which is like sort of like a project management at like Microsoft, and then transitioned to do product management. So for students, if you can apply for any product management, if it is something that you want to do, internship or grad program. Obviously Atlassian is probably one of the key ones. I know Google doesn't really do them anymore. So Atlassian is always increasing the internship intake every single year. So that's always a good experience. But if you can't do that, I know a couple of my friends went to actually the Textbook Ventures startup career fair, and some startups sometimes get PM roles, so that's an opportunity you can also go to and take a look at that. If you can't do that, I would try and just get like a breadth of experience in tech, like see if you can like get involved in like developing technology, whether that's like working as a marketing person, marketing tech product, whether that's like as a designer, and hopefully you can easily transition within that role, or even do like your own startup, right? Like I've had a couple of PM friends where they just used to be like their prior experience was becoming a founder, and you learn so many of your PM fundamentals just becoming a founder. Other options is going to a lot of meetups and events and chat to people, like tell people that you're interested. One of the PM interns I got at Eucalyptus was really just a guy that just chatted to our founders all the time, and eventually the founders were really inspired by that and by that attitude, because like a key trait of becoming a PM is passion, and so he showed that, and so that's something you could do. Hackathons are also great. You can always find a PM mentor who can help you with that. I know a couple of people that have taken a product management course. It's usually hard to get roles out of that, but it's always really good like knowledge to gain. And then the very last thing is actually writing. So, communication is really key for product managers, but if you could write a blog about like, maybe your product thought process, it's a really great way to showcase how you think. And to summarize, this is the last slide. I want to shed some light on like the good and the bad part about product management, and why I personally like it. So this might not be for everyone's. I'm sure some people like maybe stakeholder management, but the reason why I love product management is like it's super high impact role. You get to make decisions and drive features that impact the company's goals and actually can improve like someone else's life one way or another, and that's super awesome. The second part I really love is like collaborating with the team. Building software, if you have any experience, requires so much teamwork, and the building something together that you've been working on for like a week or 2 weeks is super magical, and you get to experience that if you ship often, a lot. And then the third thing is that every day is different. Like you're always having like a different thing to do, different challenges, and you'll just never get bored. The other thing, I guess like the not so great part for me personally is you have to say no a lot. And I think like before product management, I was a pretty, how would I say, like, shy person, didn't really want conflict. And you just have to essentially just say no and try to say no nicely and explain why you're saying no. And then, the second thing is there's lots of responsibility on your shoulders, but you don't really have the authority. And then the third thing here is a lot of people care about the product and will always have different opinions. And so stakeholder management is a really key thing you have to do, and it's not always the most fun. And that is all I have. That took me surprisingly longer than I thought, but still on time. Keen to take any questions if anyone has anything.
Thanks, Jenny. That was super thorough. Yeah, we definitely have a couple of questions here in the chat kind of regarding, I guess, your experience in your journey with PM and how you figured out like what type of product manager you want to be. So Joe asks, within that like PM craft triangle, how did you find out like where you sit there?
So there's a couple of things. I think I'm just going to go through there because it's so it's always like a continuous journey, right? I think every single year or like couple of months, you want to reflect on like what you enjoy doing, what you don't enjoy doing, and where you eventually want to head. And honestly, like in my first couple of years of becoming PM, you kind of start like, as a junior, you usually start off like here. Or you start off like I guess like somewhere here, right? Because you don't really get the opportunity to do more GM things, which is like looking at revenue. And so originally I was here, and then I think I essentially just wanted to challenge myself and see where I wanted to go, what general management sort of looks like. And that's like moving to a company where you have like a smaller company where you have to take a look at revenue and be a bit more closer to it. And so I guess that's why I joined Eucalyptus, right? To challenge myself and see how I go. And I think now that I've kind of touched on all three corners, that's when I decide, okay, well, I actually really enjoy a lot of the general manager stuff, which is, making sure we're meeting goals, looking at revenue and how like a business works, like the margins and stuff like that. And I also just really love like the artist side of things. And so I can see myself striving to become something like this. And so that's just coming like based on experience, based on like trying things you don't know, even if you don't know if you'll like it or not, and then getting a bit more clarity.
Cool. So Matt asks, you kind of described like how Eucalyptus was a little bit more challenging, and that you saw yourself fitting into more of like the general manager part of the triad, but why exactly did you pivot from Atlassian to Eucalyptus?
Well, I've always just loved startups. So it's really just like a preference. Like the reason I joined Atlassian in the first place was because I was sort of sick of not really knowing what I was doing at a startup, but I still love the environment. I love the energy. And so I joined Atlassian to really just learn from mentors and get like product schooled essentially. And I did. And that was like the best product school I could have ever gone to. And you had such great mentorships. It was a very safe place to learn and fail. And essentially got to a point where I felt like my learning wasn't really accelerating anymore. Like, the first year you're like doubling all of everything, and then eventually you start to become comfortable. And so that's why I also changed into teams, right? And so I essentially joined because it was just, I essentially left because I was keen for a new challenge. And also I felt like I was ready to work for a company that I joined Eucalyptus because it was a company that I always wanted to, the problem was always something I wanted to help solve. And that was around healthcare. So I just guess it was just like time.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So Matt also asks, I'm sure there's a lot of students here who are looking for like PM internships or just internships in general at startups. And you mentioned that you were emailing like 40 to 50 companies at a time. So kind of diving a little bit deeper into that, what size company were you emailing?
I don't think I cared at that point. Like I was really early in my career and I just needed experience. I think very early in my career, I literally was like, I need to learn about data. I want to join a data company. I don't care what. Like honestly, it ranged from like 10 people to maybe like 100. I never really applied for like 200 or 300 people. Maybe not big corporates, like a couple of thousand.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I guess if you were doing that again now, how would you find a good startup to work in?
Yeah, I definitely did that while I was like looking for a role and then landed on Eucalyptus. For me, it was one of the first key things is leadership. So is the CEO good? Is the executive team good? Especially for when you're becoming a product manager, right? You have to work really closely with them. You have to believe in their vision. And so number one's leadership team. Number two, is it a problem that you actually care about? Because it's very, very taxing as a product manager because it's a very emotionally draining job. If you're putting all of your energy into something you really don't care about. So make sure that the problem you actually do care about. Like obviously, I think when I was starting out, I just wanted PM experience. I wasn't super picky, but eventually once I got a bit more experience and I could be picky, that's what I looked for. And then, yeah, I always love, I also look at like the quality of the team, especially the engineers, the people I work with the most. And sometimes you know that by like either talking to them, knowing someone that works with them, or like looking at their, I guess, as bad as it sounds, like their LinkedIn.
No, can confirm that is a great way of screening people and teams to work with. Yes, I'm wary that we're running a little bit tight on time, but there are some really good questions here that I want to cover. So if anyone needs to leave because they have a deadline at 6, feel free to jump out. We are recording the session, so it'll be posted on YouTube later. Sweet. Okay, so you mentioned before you had a whole slide on like rigorous prioritization when you're doing your role. So David asks if there are any frameworks you use to prioritize releases or like features for products.
Yeah, like I think when I first started, I used to use like Intercom's RICE model, which is stands for reach, impact, confidence, and effort. And so like every time you look at a feature, you figure out like how many people just do actually has this problem and how much you actually are impacting. And then impact is like, you know, how well does this feature actually solve that problem or like your goal? And then confidence, like how confident are you about it, and effort, like how much how much, I guess, like how much effort it is. The other one I also really like is called the Kano model. That's a bit more complex, so I won't explain it. Google it if you are interested. But like, I think eventually I gave up a lot of those frameworks as I became a bit more comfortable. The number one framework that's the most effective for me is number one, what is the vision of the company? Number two, the strategy of the company and the goals. And that's how I prioritize. I just like take a look at what is the, like my prioritization is like, what is the thing we need to do now that will give us the biggest impact? And so it really, I kind of prioritize based on those things.
Sweet. See, we have a question here from Jess, I guess more specifically when you're applying for a role. So do PM jobs require you to submit a portfolio? If so, how many projects or what type of projects?
Typically, no. So maybe it's actually useful to go through the process. Typically, what you'll do is like you'll submit a resume and maybe a cover letter. And I guess that's why I suggest writing, because what you could do is include a blog link, and then usually let's say you do some content writing about like, you know, a breakdown of a certain product that you like. That's a really good indication of to the employer that you are very curious, you're analytical. So not really a portfolio in like a UX design way, or like a design kind of portfolio, or like a coding portfolio. And then oftentimes, at least for the interviews I've done, they'll send you like a take-home assignment where you might be thinking about a strategy for a certain problem. You might be doing some analysis, and then you might do like some presentations. It really depends on the company. So not typically a portfolio.
Cool. Joe asks another question. He says, do you think getting PM mentors is valuable as a new PM, and how would you find them?
I think PM mentors are amazing if you're a new PM. Like, I don't think I would be able to be where I am now without my mentors. So yes, 100%. How you would actually find them, that's super hard. I would definitely take a look at like talks that product managers do, and luckily a lot of them do talks. I would look at content they have sort of written and figure out what you'll sort of notice as you get into PM is like, you'll realize that there's so many different types of PMs. Like there might be a PM that's really like succinct and really great at strategy. And so have a think about what you want to get better at. And so, for example, at Atlassian, I had like 4 or 5 PMs, and each of them had a job. They didn't know this, but they had a job. Like one of them, I was super inspired by the way that he was able to communicate and make decisions and influence. And so I learned a lot from him. And so, yeah, have a think about like what skills you kind of want to develop, where you're and where a mentor could help you. And then oftentimes you can like either ask someone that you know and be like, hey, who's a PM that you know is really great at strategy? And hopefully that can help you match with PMs a little bit better.
Sweet. Okay. Thanks, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
That's all we have time for today. There was a lot of really nice compliments here in the chat. Jenny Davina says you're the best product manager she's ever worked with. So that's a testament to how qualified you are to be telling us about PM fundamentals today. But anyways, thank you, everyone. That is a wrap. And thank you, Jenny. That was lovely. Thank you so much for your time. It was a super thorough breakdown of what PM is, and I'm sure everyone loved how genuine you were with discussing your journey. It's great having you. I personally learned a ton from this chat on what it means to be PM and also how it differs between different organizations. For those of you who didn't get to catch this live, it will be on YouTube if you want to search up anything else. And before you go, I just wanted to share our Facebook group. So we have a student launchpad group where we have student founders, people in the community working in startups and tech, as well as the whole Textbook Ventures team. So if you wanted to join in the conversation, share a bit of resources, tell us a bit about yourself, I will drop the link here in the chat. But yeah, we also share most of our updates on startup opportunities and share resources here. Let me just grab it real quick. Cool. So on behalf of the team at Textbook Ventures, we're so grateful that you all got to make it. Thanks for coming, and I'm sure we'll all see you later. If you have any questions, feel free to stay on just a little bit. I think, Jenny, you probably have to go, but if you have any questions for TBV, feel free to stay on the line. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you, guys. Bye, and thanks so much.